Hey folks, I'm here today to talk to you about a little game about firefighting, and no, it is not Sylveon. I just got out of that. This is Flashpoint Fire Rescue, and this is going to be kind of an odd review because I've got to the point where I have so many expansions for this game, it's really hard to differentiate the base contents from the original. So we're going to do kind of a system overview of the game. So this will be including Flashpoint Fire Rescue, its Extreme Danger expansion, the Honor and Duty expansion, which I believe just came out from Kickstarter, the Second Story expansion, and the Urban Structure expansion. That is a lot. And to give you any idea of what's going on here, my second box of the game is actually filled to the brim with cardboard, and I have run out of room to put the other sheets that I own. So, just in case you didn't realize, I really am a fan of this game. Indie Boards and Cards mostly is a Kickstarter company, and they do a lot of these high-value games where their production for components and everything is really top-notch, and really and truly they've really done well with the Resistance, even if they have released free editions of it. The Resistant Avalon is doing pretty well. And Flashpoint is no different. This game has stood up really well over the last few years for me. It's still a really great solo experience, and it's still a great party experience. So we're going to go into this box and kind of break down what we can. We're going to have a little two-parter here, where we're going to have, at the end of the video, a breakdown of all these individual components that I've put in this nice big container here to keep things separate, and then kind of just a generic overview during the next segment here to kind of give you an idea of what the game plays like. So we're going to go right into that right now. Alright, so the quick overview of the boxes. If you want a more in-depth version of it, you can go to the end of the video and kind of see that. I've got everything laid out here in my little container. I'll give the details on that later. And I got all my boards stacked up here. Any Boards and Cards gives you a lot of components with their expansions. A lot of the times you're going to be getting like the single sheet expansion for this game, unless you get the secondary big box, which is the Extreme Danger expansion, which gives you a lot of the components you'll see in here. Those will be broken down into later. But what I have to say about these components is they are pretty top-notch. All the cardboard's well cut. The boards are stable. They might show a little wear and tear after years of play along the creases, but that's what you get for playing with cardboard that has creases. It's going to show its wear and tear eventually, and you might accidentally fold it a wrong way, but it should be redeemable. I mean, if I know a few people out there that have already cut their teeth on a few of these boards and they still play with them, and heck, you could even in the future, for prosperity reasons, probably just scan these or make replications of them and print them off on 8x11 paper, especially if you're into making your own maps. So this just kind of gives you an idea of the gameplay, though, is what we're going to get into. A bit of the gameplay is pretty simple. There is this house filled with little points of interest that you are trying to get into, and there are going to be little fire tokens all over the map to represent either smoke or fire and flashover. These are going to be in random locations determined at the beginning of the game when you set up, and they're usually rolled based on these coordinates, 1 through 8 and a 1 through 6. You will then choose whatever firefighters you're playing with. If you're playing with a single person, you're probably going to be playing with a team of, say, 4 or 6 firemen, whereas if you're playing with a group of people, you might split those up amongst you. But every time you do a move, you're going to be rolling after that to determine where more fire spreads. And if I roll a 2-2 here, if it would appear as a smoke, but since smoke is next to fire, it always turns to fire. One of the many little catches in this game that you're going to have to get used to. There are a decent amount of rules, and even more if you're playing with expansions, but they are easy to memorize, thankfully. The hardest parts of this game really come from when you are dealing with explosions. Now, if I were to roll a die at the end of my turn and say I would have to put fire here, this is going to flash over or explode, and it's going to go and occupy these various regions here, which go here. It's always going to spread as far as it can orthogonally, north, south, east, and west, unless you put it out. And any fire that hits the POW is going to murder anything in there, and that's one more point towards losing the game, because that's the whole point. You're going in here, you're discovering what these are, trying to escort them out to the nearest ambulance, and see if you can get at least half of them out before this entire building burns down, or the other half are burned alive. You are firemen, and it is stressful. We're gonna go right into some of the breakdowns of what I think here. This is a cooperative game like no other. This game relies a lot on random chance, and I thank it for that. Pandemic has a little bit of randomosity, but this has, a kind of total randomosity. There is luck, but, that is thematic as well. And we'll get into that in our final thoughts. But I have to say that the production quality of this game is, spot on, and it's nothing to be taken lightly. So we'll break it down here and go right into final thoughts. Okay, final thoughts. Wow, this is just a huge game in Spectrum for where it's at. This game has had a lot of support. It's got a ton of maps. It's got a ton of replayability. It's got a ton and a ton of things going for it. Where do I start with even breaking this down on my 1 to 10 scale based on BGG? Well, I guess artwork. The boards and the components are very basic. Some of the artwork is really good, especially on the firefighter cards. Those work really well. Everything else is kind of this almost stark minimalistic looking approach, where it's just enough details of this building, maybe with a few scattered potted plants and stuff in there, to get you invested, and it feels like a building. But when it's broken down to, it's a lot of black lines, green lines, red lines, and windows and versus different floors. I have to go pretty solid 6 on this. It's not all that pretty to look at, but it's very functional, and that's what really counts. The graphic design in this game is excellent. They kind of had a few transitional periods in their design from the first edition to the second edition to all the expansions they released. So you're going to be seeing that on some of my boards, where they have dice on there or they don't have dice on there for the quadrants, and there's this D12 versus a D6 and a D8 rolling mechanic in there if you're playing with these other structures like a attic or a basement, which are really fun and really kind of boost that level of competitiveness and randomosity and whatever else you're looking for in a game like this, but we'll break that down later. So artwork, solidly a 6. It works really well, and it does what it does really well. Wow, sorry people, I am just flabbergasted here because I gotta go into components. Oh my gosh, components. So many of them. I have to put them all in this big box here just to fit them all. And if they release any more expansions with any more mechanics, I'm not sure if I'm going to even be able to fit them in this. I put them in this because I'm too lazy to actually build a little tray for them. Okay. We're going to start from the bare bones. The boxes, they work. They're a little thin. They can kind of scratch fairly easily. For this artwork, but it's not like it's that big of a deal. It's just a box that's going to do its job. The rule books, oh boy, these should be summarized or bound into their own new big book these days, where you have all these scenarios kind of written in this nice little tome for every little expansion rules that come out with them, because these rulebooks, they're fairly alrightly written. They'll give you a good idea of what you're doing, but you might have to refer to them a few times. And some of the rules kind of cross over a lot, and you're not exactly sure if you're playing with this map, if you're going to be using these components versus those components. if you're going to be playing with a foamer or if you're going to shoot normal water out of the gun. Whew. So I would like to see them do something with the rulebooks later on for some of the fans out there. Maybe even build up a few different scenarios for pre-built puzzles or something. Otherwise, the token quality is pretty good. They're made of a nice hardy cardboard. The plastic bits are made out of a nice solid plastic. It's everything you kind of want from this kind of game. It's going to have a lot of variety in its design and components. Everything works well. Everything looks good. And everything is going to be solid and maintain its value over the years. I'm going to give components a solid 7. There could be a few things that could have been done a little bit better. It could have been prettier, or you can upgrade some stuff. I have to say that using the cubes for the structure of the buildings is a pretty great idea, whereas having tokens for little jammed doors and stuff, you probably could have gotten away with using some sort of generic token or something else. Or even just flipping the token over itself, or something. It felt like you almost have too many components in this for what it is. And when you play with multiple expansions, you're definitely going to feel this kind of component, shovel mass that you're going to have to pull out every game and unbury yourself. And then when you're putting it away, the setup and takedown is going to be kind of a pain unless you have some sort of organized system for this. Not to mention all those Kickstarter exclusives that other people have gotten. I didn't really get many of them from the first release of the game. I caught a few of them from the expansions. It's really going to be hard to keep those separate, folks. And it'd be nice if we had something that could contain all of this cardboard or all these components and keep it all in one place. Instead, I have to keep it into different things wrapped together. Mechanics. Let's just go right into that. Mechanics. If you are a fan of Pandemic, you might like this game. If you like randomosity a bit more than kind of built puzzle, where things are going to kind of explode on you based on prediction, that's more Pandemic. Things in here really tend to explode based on roll of the die. So you got to get used to that, but that fits that theme so well. I've had family members who were fighters, either volunteer or professionally, or whatever you want to call that. They're all volunteers in my book. They live a tough life, folks, and this game really kind of embodies that. No other game I've really played that's with this kind of theme for fighting fires, even in the video game scene, really doesn't get that whole tense moments that you have like in this game, where you have to work together every turn and make sure that everyone's performing the best they can. Unfortunately, that really does lead to quarterbacking, and this can be a really great solo experience as well as a good multiplayer experience, as long as you get people who don't really quarterback that badly. It's solid. I keep saying that about this game. That's what it is. It's solid. It's not the best mechanics in the world. They could have been a bit better explained in the rulebooks. But everything works really well, and it's going to give you a really tight feel every game. And you can change it based on different difficulties. And it's going to be feeling a little unfair, but a little fair at the same time. So we're going to give mechanics a good 7 as well. 7's a good number for this. It's going to keep you coming back and enjoying the experience. And, it's going to depend on what kind of cooperative mode you're in. If you're looking for something where there's a bit more randomosity versus a little bit more predictability and more of a puzzle element, that's all I can really say to compare this to other games of the genre. Replayability. High. Easily a 9 or a 10. No game is going to play the same because of those dice, and the way you set up, you're going to be rolling random locations where things get set up in the game. It's going to give you unique challenges every time, and you've got so many maps to choose from at this point. If you're picking and choosing expansions to pick out what maps you like, versus don't like, you can definitely do that. But if you're like me and you just kind of have everything, you've got so many opportunities to try out new modes on different maps with new characters, with new setups, with new friends, with new numbers of players. It's insane. Not to mention you can increase or decrease the difficulty based on these little flashover reroll markers that you have to put in the map. Oh, boy. There's no more to say about that. It's a solidly replayable experience. I mean, I give Friday and Sylveon and other solo games decent replay value based on how much of the same experience they're going to give you every time. But this one, you can't really have that same one just because of statistical anomalies like that. I mean, it's going to feel the same, and it's going to play the same, but the things you do and the choices you make are never going to be the same. That's the big thing. So, look at your options every time you set up the game. Find what audience you're playing with. If you're playing with the family mode versus the competitive or gamer mode, find out what's best for your group. Do replay plays if you can with them. See if they enjoy that experience, and if they do, this is one of those games that might come out, 2 or 3 times a month even, or heck, I wish it came out more than that for me. It's just we got a lot of games here, and that's what really hinders it. And cooperative games, in particular, sometimes in certain groups don't get as much play. This one you really can't argue with. There's no way to make this more competitive than what it is. You are firefighters trying to save people from a building. If you're not cooperating, then you're not playing this game. That's what it is right there. Oh, final thoughts. I don't think I have enjoyed this game any less since I picked it up, and every expansion kind of just adds to that theme more. My only concern with it is that since it does take a while to set up and play and put away, and that there's just so much there, it's going to be kind of a huge stepping stone each time you're going to introduce someone to this game. Particularly if they're not really aware of some of the new rules, or you have to explain things every map. Again, if they would just make a good solid tome of these scenarios, or like different setups, pre-built, or like little handy cheat cards or something for every map, that you could keep handy, that would really help you. But then again, this game gives you what I love in games: options. Solid, good options every time, where you can trade them in and out and get yourself some very diverse gameplay. So, that being said, we're going to take it into final thoughts right here. And then if you want, you can watch the rest of this video to get a good component overview of what each token does and where it kind of fits in the expansions. 8. I got to give it an 8. I mean, I like to stay with flat numbers according to the BGG scale. I know my numbers might not add up totally, but this is a game, if anyone tells me that they're going to play this, I'm down for it. I'll probably play 2 or 3 rounds of it a night for, once every few months if I can. If ideally, this is something I'd pull out maybe twice a month at a game night and play one game. This game just has so much fun factor, and it's got great table talk with you and your friends, as long as you're not quarterbacking or somebody's not quarterbacking the game. I mean, there are optimal strategies, but then again, luck is such a big factor here. Those optimal strategies often fall apart. As they say in combat, all great plans are great in theory until you first meet the enemy. So you're definitely going to have that experience with this game. Well, that being said, I hope you have a sincere and good time. This game normally MSRPs for about $35, I believe. I can't be quoted on that because there's so many expansions. I have forgotten a lot of this game. Other than the rules, of course. The rules are memorable and something that you'll adjust to in time. Oh boy. So, like, comment, subscribe. Please let us know that what we're doing here is either convincing you to play more games, or at least take an interest in going to a game night and playing these games with friends and kind of getting an idea. if you want this to become more of a watch it play channel or how to set up game channel, let us know, because we are willing to do this for you. If you want solid opinionated reviews from me as a pundit, that's what I'm here for right now. Give us your feedback. We really want to hear it. So until then, this has been Benjamin Hernandez. This has been Indie Boards and Cards Flashpoint Fire Rescue. Okay, so since we're doing something a little different here, since I'm trying to sell the system and not just the base game, I have pretty much all the stuff I've gotten from the various expansions in a single Rubbermaid container here. We're not advertising for them or anything, but some people like to know which container people use. So that's the one I have used to store everything. It's kind of a hodgepodge and some of the stuff is mixed together, but we'll kind of break it down token by token. So prepare for the long haul. So in here, I've put the various cardboard chips and plastic bits from all the expansions and the games. Most of the time when you're buying an expansion, you're going to get a number of new cardboard chips to represent new features in the game. One thing that I have to note is that if you do purchase the Extreme Danger expansion, you will get a number of these generic looking fire guys as opposed to the first game, which has the colored guys. Depending on how you feel, you can switch out your individual player colors with these little guys and put these rubber stoppers on the bottom, which was a great inclusion to go with the expansions. That way you get that more thematic feel, and the fact that you've got 6 players you're trying to manage and you need to work on every little bit of it. So that's the rubber stoppers, these color pieces, and the player markers. There are some various player tokens that come in the base game for little health markers for the medic to put underneath some of the victims that you'll get in the game. These help you move them quicker through the burning building as they've received medical care. Basically, it saves you a single point every time you want to move them, which does add up in the long haul. These are little action tokens that they included with one of the expansions as well. I believe it was the High Rises expansion. These are used with the individual player powers to kind of represent some of the extra tokens you have for abilities such as commanding or putting out fires or even just sprinting. That was a nifty little addition, especially since they added a whole bunch of these other ones to represent the actual action tiles themselves when they are used and when they are not. Some people like these over the the round ones that came in the base game, which represented your scored up ones, but I say that you keep a number of these ones and the scored up ones together. That way you can kind of eliminate confusion on if you have banked up points or not. Going through it, you've got my little flashover markers here, which are little flares or flare-up markers. Keep losing things in the box. These guys represent when you re-roll a die. When you put one of these on the map, anytime you roll a die and it lands on one of these, you're always going to have to re-roll and put more fire out on the map or more smoke, and that can be a huge thing in your game to increase or decrease the difficulty. And that's also very important when dealing with how often you want things to explode in your face as well. In the Extreme Danger expansion, I believe this was called, it came with this little car and explosive barrels combo, which introduced a new concept where basically if this thing takes a number of points of structural damage due to fire, it'll eventually explode and either cause hazardous chemicals or fire to spread throughout the building and cause a general pain. So you always would have to keep an eye on this if you're playing with like the garage map or you were playing in the chemical factory map, which this game came with. You have 2 double-sided ambulance and fire truck tokens. Really and truly, you're only going to need to worry about one side per thing because you only get access to one of each. The fire truck is a great little tool that allows you to drive around and pick up people with either a ladder or put a fire out with a hose, so long as there's nobody in that region to be hurt or pushed away by that water. That's a tricky mechanic, but it can actually save the day in a number of games, and I think it's almost necessary to have in some maps. The ambulance, on the other hand, this just goes around to wherever you call it, and if it runs over or it happens to be on the place where a person of interest is, or a victim of the fire, it'll pick them up, and that'll go into your score area for determining whether you win the game or not. In the game, they introduced a number of things like open window hazards, which are these little tokens here. Not much to say. This just says that fire will go through them or not, and it causes the firemen then need to take another action in order to get into the building or out of the building. Over here was something they introduced in the second floor expansions, where the ladder, where you have the bottom part and the top part, and you could fold these down and then erect them to help you gain access to second level windows. With that came with the fire truck ladder as well, which moves around with the fire truck. But if this is deployed, you can't actually move the fire truck until it's put back down. So another interesting mechanic in there. I don't usually play with this one much because I much rather have the hose. I believe you can still utilize a hose with this though. I keep all my structural integrity markers over in this part. This one is an interesting concept in the game where there's multiple lose conditions. So most of the time you're playing with the various people of interest or points of interest, and those are usually blank or they're a survivor that you have to rescue from the fire. And if you lose a certain number of those people, you're going to lose the game. But of course, since the theme is kind of to rescue as many people as possible, some people like to play through that and just see how many they can save. But these structural integrity markers is a different mechanic in there entirely. It has another game end condition where you will basically be putting these out on building tiles, and these will represent how well the integrity of that wall is, and then overall what the integrity of the building is. Most of them will start with 0. If they get hit once by an exploding fire, they'll take 1. If they get hit twice, they are considered just broken down, and fire will be allowed to pass outside of them as well. But if you ever use up all these cubes, you are hosed. The building will collapse and the game will end automatically. Now, for the Honor and Duty expansion, they had a number of these foam markers for the various plane and submarine maps. This is just an optional way to fight the fire with your fire truck. Spraying foam does a better job of preventing where fires go and turning fires into smoke, instead of just simply having to waste action points to put out a fire. So, an interesting concept. Again, maybe not something you play with very often. So here's the door tokens now. Door tokens represent open and closed doors. They have just 2 sides. These come in the base game. And, a door has an interesting mechanic where if it's closed and it gets hit with exploding fire, it'll stop the fire, but then the door will be perpetually blown off and gone. Otherwise, it's just there to have the firefighters need to open and close it. If the door is open, fire can pass through it, so that's kind of the reason why you might have to worry about whether it's open or closed. You also have these green ones, which are fireproof doors. These can become jammed, which also has these little jam markers down here. But they never explode when fire hits them. So those doors are always going to constantly be there, but they do have a chance of jamming. It's going to take another action for a fireman to unjam a door, and again, that can slow you down. So another interesting mechanic, I believe this came in the Extreme Danger expansion as well. Speaking of which, we also have these tiles that represent the up and downstairs tiles. So if you're playing on a map where you want to integrate a basement or an attic, or if you have stairs in there that need to be cut off or anything, this is how you represent that there are stairs that you can move up and down. You have a secondary explosion marker here, which again works just like the other truck, in case it causes a chemical leak or if it explodes into more fire. Here's something I really thought was interesting. These are cracked floor markers. Now these actually represent when the floor to the floor below you is being damaged. These will appear whenever things start cracking and exploding, and eventually they will be utterly destroyed and you're not going to be able to walk on that tile anymore. In order to get around it, you have to put down a ladder, or you can even erect a ladder up through it and utilize it as an exit. Very cool mechanic in there. Again, I already went over these action markers. They included a few of these chemical drip markers for when you release chemicals. They included a aiming precision marker in one of the expansions, which I wholly recommend that you get from the second level expansion. These represent the targets of your blast of water from the fire hose. These help you remember where you're aiming and where the splash effects happen. This one is a simple one where you put this on top of a fire to represent where the fire exploded, and you can follow it, orthogonally north, south, east, west to find out where the fire went. You also have these chemical tokens. When these explode, more fire happens. These came in the base game. These symbolize places that you're going to want to kind of clean up and deal with before a fire hits them and makes the explosions of the building even worse. And finally, for tokens, oh gosh, we're at the end. We have the point of interest markers. You will only be playing with about 15 of these, and half of them will be survivors, the other half will be blanks. In this case, these are all survivors, so unlucky them if they were to go in first, but here's a blank one. These come into the map face down, and we'll explain that later on in more in-depth gameplay. We also have a number of dice here, a D6, a D12, and a D8. The base game came with a D6 and a D8 to represent the coordinates on the map, but when the game expanded, they decided to put in the D12 so that way you could cover the basement or attic levels. Oh, okay, into cards. Each player can get a player card to represent their color. That one's pretty self-explanatory. But then you also have some player reference cards here. These help you figure out what actions you can take, how much they take to do. For example, moving always costs 1 action point. Opening doors and closing doors can take an action point. Putting out a smoke is usually easier than putting out a fire. Being able to ride in a cat car when it moves around is free. But in order to fire like the pack gun or the deck gun here, it takes 4. So that's pretty self-explanatory. You have the various roles here, which in Flashpoint you are not actually set on these roles, which I found very amazing and insightful for this game. Normally in most cooperative games you're going to be stuck playing the same role the entire game. In Flashpoint you can actually use action points to become another role in the game. Yes, even the dog. So just imagine that there's a whole group of people out there waiting to go in, and you're using your action points basically to call them in while you go out. Oh, now we go into boards, man. There's so many boards in this game. Oh, I've got a whole box of these boards. Every expansion basically comes with 1 or 2 of these boards, and I'll be lucky if I find a place to store these all. Especially since 2 of the boards pretty much are dedicated towards the attic and the basement expansion. Over here you've got one that was the Honor and Duty, where you have the submarine and the airplane, both really interesting maps. I don't think you really are going to have a attic or basement here on the various levels of these. But they look cool, they're very nicely printed, everything's clean. You've got an area on top for your saves and your, people who have succumbed to the fire, as well as some little areas that people sometimes put the flashover points for. Now you notice on these maps that there's the coordinates here that correspond with the dice. You've got your D8s and you've got your D6s here. as well as the various areas where you can actually move the fire truck and the ambulance. These are kind of your points of interest for where you're going to be moving around things to, fire to deck gun or put out fires or rescue people. In this case, this map actually comes with 2 fuel tanks here, which are hazards built into there, and then there's these little symbols on here for doors. Anytime there's like these ×2 spaces, kind of represents that it's harder to move on them. Also printed on the map are these red lines along every quadrant. This represents the area that the deck gun can actually fire, so long as there's no actual firemen in there or face-up PO points of interest. So it's kind of a finicky thing. A lot of people are going to have to work together to make sure that you're not in this area at the end of your turn, as well as nobody knows what's in there for the POIs in order to fire the deck gun. It's really hard to determine when to use it some days, and also it just takes so much time unless you're playing the guy who can actually fire the duck gun very well and move around the equipment very well as well. I'm using a lot of wells there, so I'm sorry. Here are the areas that represent the doors. You're going to always put the door tokens on these areas. They kind of are put in that thing to represent that they have a structural integrity of their own. You will not actually be putting structural integrity on here, but that's just how those work. Alright, so we've just repositioned the camera here to get a better glimpse of these boards. You'll notice that this is an older board, but it's still from the 2nd edition of the game. Each of the quadrants is actually clearly marked out on this version, as well as the little arrows that represent where fire or POIs will go if you happen to roll in the initial setup where they go differently. Since fire and POWs can't really occupy the same space until the actual game is on, or what is known as like the spawning period for a POI, every time you kind of roll a quadrant that's already taken, you're going to be moving it along this line until you find something that's eventually open. And these all kind of have a progressive leading towards the map, but they also all kind of point away from each other. So you'll be able to find a cohesive place for things to spawn and generate in the game. There are a lot of these boards. They're all quadrifold, except for the attic and basement, which are just a duofold. That's because these will be going on top of your actual game board to represent that secondary area, and usually they'll have the things printed on there. There are a lot of expansions for this game, folks. There's not a lot more to say about that other than most of the time what you're buying is another board for the game. As you can see, I've got a very thick collection of cardboard here, and it's all very hardy, very well printed. And Indie Boards and Cards has done their thing. So that's just kind of a general view of the breakdown of the components.